Hello, I'm Saremy with Sew Liberated. Have you ever made a bodice and maybe the neck and the shoulders are fitting you really nicely, but the bust is a little too loose? Or maybe you've got the bust fitting really nicely, but the armholes are a little tight. You're probably in need of a small bust adjustment. You just can't win. You're trying to get one to fit the other, and you want all of it to fit you. You can check out our free bodice fitting guide, which is linked in the description, to learn if you need a small bust adjustment. Bodices can have different kinds of shaping. They can have darts, they can have princess seams, and some bodices have no shaping at all. We have a whole course on how to fit a darted bodice. It's called Learn to Fit and Sew Bodices, and you'll learn how to fit and sew the darted hinterland bodice. A great way to start learning how to fit your bodice is to check out our free bodice fitting guide, which is linked in the description. But some fitted bodices don't have darts, they have princess seams instead, like the Ember Dress from Sew Liberated. In this video, I'm going to show you how to do a small bust adjustment using the Ember Dress, which has a princess seam that goes to the shoulder. You'll be able to use this adjustment on most bodices that have a princess seam that goes to the shoulder. I'm also going to be showing you how to remove all the shaping if you would like a bodice without the princess seam. And if you're in need of a full bust adjustment or an FBA, we have a video for you too. Just check the description. My pattern pieces today are half scale so that they fit on the screen, and my seam allowances will also be to scale, so they may look smaller than yours, but they are the right amount. We always work on the seam lines when we're making adjustments so that we can maintain accuracy and we don't change anything unintentionally. Now, if you need help determining how much to decrease your bust for your small bust adjustment, check out the fitting guide and it'll walk you through the steps for figuring that out. The main purpose of the small bust adjustment is to decrease the volume right here at the fullest part of the bust. So we're going to do that in a way that decreases the volume and also trims it down the whole front. All right, for the small bust adjustment, we mostly just need this side front piece, but we may be trimming a little bit at the waist here to true it up to match the seam once we're done. I'm going to draw in my seam allowances here parallel to the edge. And we want our seam allowances drawn on along the princess seam here and the shoulder seams. We're going to cut along this seam allowance here or just inside of it. And we're going to stop right here at the shoulder, making a hinge, just like this. We're going to cut up to this hinge on the opposite side. We're also going to want a line straight across here at the apex. You can make this perpendicular to the grain line. All right, so the last little thing we're going to do is we're going to make a little hinge right here at the apex on this cut piece here. So we're going to cut right up to the edge of the paper there, just like that. And then that way, when we pull this over, we can straighten it out a little bit. So we want a little hinge there. So we have a hinge here and we have a hinge right here that looks like this. So once you've decided how much you want to decrease your bust, and you can use our fitting guide to help you do this math, you're going to want to divide that number in half. Let's say you want to decrease your total bust circumference by 1 inch. You want to divide this number in half since we're working on half of the pattern. So that would be a 1/2 inch. We're going to mark on this line a 1/2 inch away from our cut line toward the bust. Now we have our piece cut up to here and to here, and we're going to pull it over till it's touching this line, that cut edge, nice and flat. And then we're going to pull this over so that the waist doesn't change, so that the cut line hits the cut line at the waist as well. And now we're going to secure with some tape. Just like that. So now we've decreased the bust a 1/2 inch on this side front, but we haven't changed the waist circumference at all. Now we just need to true up this little bit here. It doesn't look like much on mine since it's a half scale, but I'll bet yours is more visible. So we can take our ruler and trim that off. And this exact same amount we're going to trim off on our other front here. You can do this at the lengthen and shorten line, but if it's a very small amount, you can do it right here down at the bottom. So we'll measure that amount, and I'm measuring the amount right here on the seam line, the amount that it's decreasing. So I'm measuring right here the amount that I'm trimming off. We can do this because when we decrease the fullness of the bust here, we also don't need the additional length that was needed for that fuller bust. So now we can trim the bottom here, and we can trim this bottom here. And if you want to make sure that everything's still going to sew together, you can measure your seam line right here and make sure that it matches the seam line right here. So now I always like to compare and see what the difference is. So here's our original, and we'll lay our flatter bust on top, and you can see that we've lost this little bit here. That's a 1/2 inch, so that's an inch in total circumference there. We didn't change our waist circumference and any of the other seams, so everything else will sew together. The Ember in particular is pretty forgiving when it comes to a change like this, since it's got a drawstring waist or elastic waist. So the waist isn't super tight. This isn't a very fitted bodice, so it's a very easy change to make. To remove the seam entirely of this princess line, this is a pretty simple one on the Ember dress because it is a relaxed fit dress. It's not a super shaped princess seam or tight bodice. So it's a very easy change. So we're going to need both of our center front and our side front, and we need our seam allowances drawn in at the shoulder, princess seam, and waistline here. We're going to overlap our pattern pieces, stacking the seam line there, right there at the shoulder and at the waist. We're not concerned about the princess line in between. Now, it might not line up perfectly down here. I would line it up at the shoulder, best you can there, and at the waist. And then we're going to tape to secure it. And the last thing we're going to do is true up the shoulder seam and the waist seam. Now, the shoulder seam is pretty simple. We're going to draw a straight line. And because I have my seam allowance drawn in from shoulder to neckline, I'm just going to connect that line as one solid line and then add my seam allowance back in a parallel amount, trimming off that little tiny peak there along the princess seam. Just like that. So now we have a straight shoulder seam. Now this shoulder seam didn't change in length, and we didn't change our armhole or our side seam. So all of these seams are still going to sew to all the other pattern pieces just like they did before. The last thing we're going to do is true our princess seam here at the waist. We want to maintain a right angle here, and we want to maintain a nice seam transition at our side seam. So we're basically just going to smooth this out. I can use my ruler, or I can probably eyeball it a little bit. It's going to be a pretty subtle change, and I'm just going to flatten this edge out and get rid of the jog happening there at the seam of the princess line. Just like that. You can now cut this still on the fold, and you'll have a solid bodice piece with no princess seams, and all of your other pattern pieces are going to sew to this with no problems because we didn't change any of the seam lengths on the other edges. And there you go. That's how you're going to get your princess seam-free front bodice on the Ember dress.